Margaret Leland was 67 when she walked into her doctor's office for her annual checkup. The weather outside was gray and cold, early March in Ohio, and she had bundled herself in her favorite wool coat and practical boots. The waiting room was quiet that morning, just a young couple with a baby and an older man reading the newspaper. Margaret had lived alone for over 10 years. Widowed at 56, she had never remarried, nor had she seriously dated again. Not because she wasn't interested, but because after a lifetime of raising 3 children and taking care of others, she had finally discovered how to take care of herself, and that included her sexuality. She had never spoken to anyone about it, not her daughters, not her friends, and certainly not her doctor. But in the quiet of her home, in her soft sheets and lamplight, she had discovered the kind of touch that was not about loneliness or longing, but presence. She had always assumed, as many women of her generation did, that sexuality was something that faded with age, or worse, something inappropriate once the candles on your birthday cake passed 60. But here she was, healthier, more grounded, and more connected to her body than she had been in her 30s. Still, there was a whisper of doubt. Was this normal? Safeful? She wasn't sure, and for the first time, she decided to ask. Dr. Rivera, her physician for the past 5 years, was younger, mid-40s, direct but kind. During the checkup, they went over the usual things: blood pressure, bone density, medications. Then, with her heart thumping like a drum, Margaret took a breath. "Can I ask you something a little personal?" she said. Dr. Rivera nodded. "Of course." Margaret's hands fidgeted in her lap. "Is it normal for someone my age to still have sexual feelings? To masturbate?" There, the word was out, hanging in the air between them like a loud, humming silence. Dr. Rivera didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled gently and said, "Yes, it's not only normal, it's healthy, and you're not alone." That moment changed something for Margaret. She walked out of the office feeling lighter, less secretive, less like a relic of the past, and more like a living, breathing woman with desires that mattered. What she didn't realize then was just how important that question had been. Because for many over 60, sexuality becomes an uncomfortable mystery. It's treated as something you shouldn't talk about, something that disappears with youth, something that belongs to another time in life. But Margaret wasn't the exception. She was part of a quiet majority, and there are a few things people her age and older need to know. Masturbation after 60 isn't just common, it's good for you. When Margaret began researching later that week, she found something surprising. A study by the National Poll on Healthy Aging found that over 40% of adults between 65 and 80 are sexually active in some way. Masturbation remains one of the most private but persistent forms of intimacy among older adults, especially those who are single, widowed, or in long-term relationships where physical intimacy has shifted. And the benefits? They're not just emotional, they're physical. Margaret learned that regular sexual activity, even self-pleasure, helps improve sleep, boost mood, reduce stress, and support cardiovascular health. It increases blood circulation, which is vital for joint health and muscle tone. It helps maintain hormone balance, particularly estrogen and testosterone, both of which continue to play key roles in emotional and physical well-being well into older age. For women especially, masturbation can support vaginal health by improving elasticity, lubrication, and overall comfort. After menopause, many women experience dryness or discomfort during intimacy. Regular self-stimulation can help reduce those symptoms naturally. For men, it can support prostate health and reduce the risk of erectile dysfunction. And for both genders, it supports a sense of bodily autonomy, confidence, and emotional peace. Margaret laughed out loud when she read one article that called masturbation an all-natural mood booster with no prescription required. But beyond the health benefits, there was something even more powerful at work. Masturbation is a form of self-respect. For decades, Margaret had associated sexuality with someone else's needs: her husband's desire, her duty, the unspoken rules of being a good wife, a modest woman. But touching herself, exploring her body without judgment or performance, had become something sacred. It was an act of claiming her body back, not from anyone else, but from the silence and shame that had followed her through most of her life. She didn't need a partner to feel pleasure. She didn't need permission to feel alive. She needed only herself. That realization helped her in other ways too. She stopped apologizing for what she liked, even outside the bedroom. She began painting again, something she hadn't done in 20 years. She started saying no to things she didn't want, yes to things that brought her joy. And it all stemmed from that one moment of honesty in her doctor's office and with herself. Of course, like all things, masturbation should be approached with care. Margaret also learned about the importance of staying in tune with her body. As she aged, her skin became more sensitive, so she used natural oils and made sure to take her time. She chose privacy, of course, but also freedom, no longer embarrassed by her own reflection, no longer shying away from sensation. She read that if something caused discomfort or pain, it wasn't to be ignored. It was a message. Just like any form of self-care, self-touch required attentiveness, awareness, and respect. She also read about how masturbation can, in some cases, become a replacement for human connection, and that balance was important. But Margaret didn't feel isolated. She had her book club, her friends, her grandkids. She was simply adding another layer to a life she was already enjoying. Months later, sitting on her back porch watching the late summer sunset, she smiled at how different she felt. Not younger. She didn't want to be younger, but more whole. When her neighbor Ellen, newly retired and fresh from a difficult divorce, sat down beside her and began talking about how strange it was to be alone after so long, Margaret listened carefully. Then, in a quiet moment, she said, "You know, you don't stop needing closeness just because someone's gone. You don't stop being a woman just because you get older." Ellen looked at her eyes wide. Then slowly, she smiled. Margaret didn't say more. She didn't need to, because she knew that sometimes permission is all someone needs to feel, to explore, to embrace themselves. And the truth is, if you're over 60 and still masturbating, you're not strange or broken or shameful. You're human. You're alive. And there's nothing more beautiful than that.